The wind had a voice that winter, low and constant, like an animal circling the house. Clara Turns had learned to listen to it, not with fear, but the wary regard of someone who'd lived too many years among things that could turn violent in an instant. Out in the high prairie east of the Bridger Range, silence wasn't peace, it was a lull. And she'd grown accustomed to watching the horizon the way some folks studied scripture, as if the truth of her life might one day be written there. She'd come west 5 years ago with her husband, Thomas, and buried him just 16 months later. A fever had taken him fast, burning out his breath before she'd had time to believe he was truly leaving. They hadn't made it to town after all, his dream of building a mercantile near Bozeman gone with the weight of one shallow grave behind the barn. Clara stayed. She stayed because there was nowhere else to go, and because, after what came before Thomas, she needed the world to be small again. Now each day unfolded with quiet ritual. She split wood before the sun reached the fence line, milked the 2 aging goats, and turned the ashes in the stove before adding new kindling. She kept to herself, trading eggs and preserves once a month with the Bartons downriver, never going into town unless her stores ran near empty. The solitude suited her like a well-worn coat. It didn't ask questions, it let her forget. That morning had been colder than most. A pale skin of frost lay even on the windowsills inside, and the sky was the color of tin. The day passed in routine, though she felt a pull in her bones she couldn't name, something off in the air, like the moment just before lightning. By dusk, she was watching the edge of the trees from her porch, wrapped in her father's old wool coat, hand resting near the shotgun she always brought out with her after dark. The man came just after sunset. He was walking the road from the south, where no one ever came in winter. Not from that way. His coat was dusted white with snow, and he walked with the deliberate pace of someone who had no better options than his feet. No horse, no wagon, just a canvas satchel slung over one shoulder and the caution of a man used to sleeping under open sky. Clara didn't rise at first, just watched him approach while her heart quickened like hooves on dry earth. He stopped at the edge of her yard, careful not to step past the posts that marked her land, and took off his hat. "Even in, ma'am," he said. His voice was low, steady, nothing in it she could name as trouble, but nothing easy either. "I don't mean to scare you, just need a place out of the wind." The wind surged around them both, answering. She studied his face, young, maybe 30, maybe less, the kind of face that could pass unnoticed in a crowd, but not in this silence. He had a scar beneath his left eye, old and pale like a half-closed secret, and his hands, chapped, bruised, calloused, hung open at his sides. "Where are you headed?" she asked. He shrugged, nowhere in particular, just passing through. "Ain't nowhere to pass to out here." "Then maybe I'm done passing." Clara considered the line. She didn't trust poetry from strangers. Still, something in the way he said it, like he'd worn through all his choices and this was the last, gave her pause. "You got a name?" she asked. He hesitated just long enough for her to notice. "Jonah," he said finally, "Jonah Black." It didn't ring any bells, but that wasn't comforting. Plenty of men out here tried to leave behind who they used to be. She should have told him to keep walking. There were plenty of reasons to do just that. But she looked at him again, really looked, and saw the way he kept glancing back toward the trees, like something might follow. "Barn's got a loft," she said, voice flat. "You can stay there tonight. I don't feed strangers." He nodded the barest movement. "Appreciate it." She pointed him toward the barn and didn't look back until he was out of sight. Only then did she let out the breath she'd been holding. Inside, she bolted the door and sat by the stove until the fire was nothing but coals. Sleep came slowly, laced with unease. Out in the barn, the stranger lay still in the hay, staring up into the dark rafters. Neither of them knew it yet, but that night would be the last quiet one for a long while. In the morning, the snow had crusted into a brittle sheen, catching sunlight like shards of glass scattered across the fields. Clara stood by the kitchen window with a tin mug of chicory, watching steam curl up from its surface and listening for signs from the barn. But it was quiet. She hadn't slept well. The thought of a man lying just yards from her door, unknown and unsorted, had unsettled her in ways she didn't want to name. Still, she'd let him stay. That meant something. She didn't offer shelter lightly. Trust, once broken, didn't mend easy. By the time she stepped out into the cold, the stranger was already chopping wood beside the barn. His coat hung open, breath fogging in the air, face set with quiet purpose. He hadn't asked, just found the axe and started working. The rhythm of it echoed faintly across the clearing, like a heartbeat. "You find the tools all right," she called, keeping a polite distance. He looked up, wiping a forearm across his brow. "Axe was where it ought to be, hope you don't mind." "I mind men who sit idle more than those who don't ask permission," she said. He nodded once, then kept chopping. She left him to it. Through the day, she watched from behind her tasks. He stacked the wood with care, not fast but not lazy either, and when the goats bleated, he brought them hay without being told. He moved like a man used to pulling his weight without making a fuss about it. At noon, she left a plate of bread and hard cheese on the porch without a word. When she came back later, it was gone, but the cup was set back beside the door, washed clean. That night she heard him walking around the barn, soft footsteps overhead, a board creaking now and then, the muffled cough of someone unused to warmth. But he didn't come to the house, and she didn't call him in. On the third day, the wind shifted. They were both in the yard, she clearing brush from the fence line, he repairing a busted rail near the gate, when a sound drifted up the road. Horses, more than one. A low beat, steady and slow, like a patrol. Clara stiffened. No one came this far out unless they meant to. Jonah looked up too, already moving toward her. "You expecting company?" She shook her head. Her mouth felt dry. "Not in 5 years." The riders came into view around the bend, 3 men, long coats, rifles at their sides. The lead wore a sheriff's badge that caught the light just enough to see. Clara exhaled, but only a little. Law didn't always mean safety, not out here. The men drew up at her fence. The sheriff tipped his hat. "Ma'am, name's Price. Sheriff out of Miles City. We're tracking someone, came through these parts. Wondered if you'd seen any travelers pass by in the last week or so." Her eyes didn't move to Jonah. She kept them fixed on the sheriff's face. "Not many pass this way in winter. Roads near impassable past the river." The sheriff nodded, but his gaze swept the yard, lingered a moment too long on Jonah, then back to her. "Heard a man was headed this way. Calls himself Jonah Black. You hear that name, you let us know. He's wanted for questioning." Clara didn't flinch. Questioning about what? "Just some misunderstandings back east," Price said. "Best not to get tangled up in M." She looked at him long and flat. "You come all this way for misunderstandings." The sheriff's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "We like to be thorough." "I'll let you know if I see anyone," she said, "but I can't say I've seen him." There was a pause. One of the other men shifted in his saddle, the leather creaking. "All right then," Price said at last. "You be careful out here, ma'am." When they rode off, Clara didn't speak. Not until their figures were just specks against the horizon. Then she turned to Jonah, who hadn't moved. "You bring trouble to my door." His face was unreadable, but his hands were clenched at his sides. "I didn't hurt nobody," he said, "but that don't mean they ain't lookin' to hang me for it." She stepped closer, voice low. "What happened?" He looked past her toward the line of trees again. There was a man, rich, cruel, owned everything between the river and the mountains. He took what he wanted, from everyone. One day he took something he shouldn't have, from a girl I owed more to than I could ever repay. I didn't kill him, but I didn't stop what came next either. The silence between them deepened. Wind rustled the bare branches like dry bones. "I didn't ask for your past," she said finally, "but you brought it here just the same." "I'll go," he said, "tonight." She thought of the barn, the chopped wood, the goats fed before she rose. She thought of the way the sheriff had looked at her, like he already knew she'd lied. "No," she said, almost to herself. "You'll stay, for now." He looked at her then, really looked, as if he saw not a woman alone but a woman who had chosen her silence and was now choosing something else. She turned and walked back toward the house. Behind her, Jonah remained still. That night neither of them slept. The stove hissed, the wind stirred, and somewhere out in the dark, trouble circled back like a hawk who remembered every path it had flown. March came harder than usual that year, with winds that screamed through the gullies and snow that didn't know when to quit. It fell heavy on the roof, muffling the world into a hush so deep Clara sometimes caught herself whispering, even inside her own home. Jonah stayed. He fixed the roof where the snow had caved it in, mended the leaning fence near the creek, and helped her dig out the barn when the doors froze shut. They spoke little simple words, short as frostbit breath. But it wasn't silence like before, the hollow kind. This was something else. Measured, wary, and slowly, bit by bit, less alone. He slept in the barn still, though on nights when the cold cut too sharp, she'd find his tracks on the porch come morning, where he'd sat a while before slipping back to his corner in the hayloft. She never asked why. She understood how a man might need to hover near something without quite touching it. Clara began leaving the door unlatched. Spring took its time coming. When the thaw finally came, it peeled away the snow in ragged layers, revealing what winter had buried. Fallen limbs, cracked boards, and an old sparrow's nest under the eaves, battered but intact. One morning, Clara found Jonah standing by the creek, sleeves rolled to his elbows, water running over his hands like he was trying to scrub something deeper than skin. She didn't call out, just watched him from the edge of the porch. That afternoon, she brought out the broken cedar chest from the loft, the one Thomas had built for her before the fever, and set it between them on the porch. He didn't ask why, just fetched tools and got to work. They spent the next 2 days at it, side by side, sanding, fitting, aligning joints until it held firm again. When it was finished, she ran her hand across the lid and said, "He built it to carry our linens, but I always thought it looked more like a casket." Jonah didn't speak, but his eyes flicked to her, sharp and steady, not afraid. "I kept it anyway," she said. "Seemed wrong to throw away something someone made with their hands." He nodded once. Some things still hold even after the breaking. They didn't say much else that evening, but when he rose to go back to the barn, she didn't let him. Just looked at him hard, then turned and opened the door wide. Inside, he sat at the edge of the chair near the stove, palms on his knees like a man not sure where to rest. She made coffee, strong and black, and poured it into the good mugs. They drank in silence. Not comfort, not yet, but something shaped like the beginning of it. Later, when the fire had burned low, Clara brought out a faded bundle of letters. She didn't read them aloud, just held them in her lap. "My first husband," she said, voice quiet. "Not Thomas, the one before." Jonah didn't look away. "He left me in Missouri, took everything but my name and the old mule we shared, rode off with a girl not much older than a child, and said he needed something softer than the life I gave him." She stared at the coals. "When I met Thomas, he didn't ask questions, just let me be still. I thought that was love." Jonah's voice, when it came, was low. "Sometimes it is." "Maybe," she said, "or maybe I just wanted something that didn't hurt." The silence that followed was not empty. That night Jonah slept on a mat by the fire. She didn't offer the bed. He didn't ask. But in the small hours, when a coyote howled somewhere near the ridge, she found herself reaching out in sleep. Her hand met nothing but quilt, yet the echo of warmth lingered. The next day, the world cracked open again. She was tending the goat shed when she heard it, the sharp bark of a rifle, one shot far off, then another closer. She ran back to the house, heart pounding like hooves in dry brush. Jonah was already on the porch, gun in hand. "They found me," he said simply. She looked toward the south trail, smoke rising. "How many?" she asked. "Don't know yet." She took her rifle down from the mantel, loaded it fast. "You know how to shoot?" he asked. She didn't answer, just clicked the chamber shut. Outside, the world had gone still again, the quiet before the storm. She felt it in her bones, deep as the scar that ran down her back from Missouri, from the night she'd first learned what it meant to run. But she wasn't running now, and Jonah Black, whoever he had been, stood beside her, not begging, not hiding, just there. They waited together as the wind carried smoke closer, and the past came riding hard. By late afternoon, the smoke had thinned to a gray ribbon trailing into the sky, and the woods beyond the clearing grew restless. Birds fell silent. The wind shifted, carrying the sharp scent of pine and something darker, gunpowder and sweat. Jonah stood just inside the door, rifle cradled to his chest, eyes fixed on the tree line. Clara moved through the cabin with a steadiness born of years spent bracing for the worst. She filled a bucket, lit the oil lamp, checked the latch on the root cellar. Small things. Things that kept hands busy and fear at bay. They didn't speak. When the first man appeared at the edge of the woods, he didn't shout. just stepped out slow, rifle slung easy across his back. A dark coat, wide hat, and the kind of stillness that told Clara he wasn't new to killing. Two others flanked him, half hidden among the trees. Jonah raised the rifle, barrel just a hair below the man's chest. That's far enough. The man smiled. It was a small, cold thing. Jonah Black, or is it James Bell again? Clara heard the shift behind the name, saw the way Jonah's fingers tightened just slightly. Names don't matter, he said. What do you want? Justice, the man said, still smiling, or what passes for it out here. Jonah didn't move. That what they call bounty hunting now. The man's expression didn't change. We got a warrant. Sheriff Price deputized me last fall. We ain't just guns for hire. And the girl he hurt, Jonah's voice was low, steady. You hunting justice for her too? The man didn't answer, just took one slow step closer. That was when Clara stepped forward, rifle raised. I said that's far enough, she called. The bounty man looked at her like he might laugh. Lady, this don't concern you. It does now. Another step and she fired. The shot rang through the clearing, echoing off the hills. She'd aimed low, a warning just ahead of his boots, but it did the trick. He stopped cold, eyes hardening. You sure about this? He asked, turning back to Jonah. You gonna get folks killed for a cause long dead? Jonah didn't look away. Ain't a cause, just truth. The men retreated, slow, like wolves denied their prey but not discouraged. Clara watched until they were swallowed by the trees again. When the forest went quiet, she turned to Jonah. You gonna tell me the rest now? He set the rifle down gently, sat on the porch steps like he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. I was born James Bell, he said. My father was a drunk, my mother too scared to leave. I ran off at 16, took whatever work I could. Freighting, fencing, sometimes worse. Ended up outside Laramie, working for a man named Baird. Clara sat beside him, arms crossed against the chill. He owned everything out there. Land, cattle, people. Folks feared him more than they feared the law. I was just muscle. Thought I was better than the rest because I didn't hit women, didn't steal. But I stood by while others did. He rubbed his hands together, knuckles scraped from days of work. There was a girl, Eliza, young, quiet, worked in Baird's kitchen. One night she came to me bruised, bloody. Said Baird cornered her and told her she was his now. I helped her run, thought I'd done right, thought that was enough. Clara watched his profile, the hard lines carved there. Baird sent men after her, found her 2 days out in the canyon near Horseshoe Bend. I was too late, she jumped rather than be taken back. A long silence stretched between them, deeper than any cold. I burned the house, Jonah said finally. Everything he owned. I didn't kill him. But when the fire was done, there was nothing left of what he'd built, not in this world. Clara didn't speak. She just looked out over the prairie, where the wind stirred the grass in slow circles. After a time, she said, You were wrong to think silence was enough, but you're right to want to stay. Jonah looked at her then, eyes rimmed with the weariness of someone who'd never had a place last longer than the boots on his feet. I don't want to run anymore, he said. Then don't. That night they barred the doors and kept the lamps low. They took turns watching. When it was her shift, Clara stood near the window, eyes on the horizon, shotgun resting beside her. Jonah slept in the chair, head tilted back, lips parted in a peace that seemed new. Somewhere out there, men were circling, waiting for the thaw to turn mud into passable roads. They would come again. But the cabin stood, strong and lit from within. And for the first time in a long while, Clara didn't feel like she was bracing for a storm. She felt like she was weathering it. The thaw came slow, dragging its feet like a man not ready to go. Snow melted in patches first, pooling beneath the porch steps and along the ruts that lined the trail out to the road. With it came the creak and moan of wood stretching after long cold and the earth softening enough to smell like something living again. Clara dug in the garden on a gray morning, her hands working the spade with more force than care. She didn't look up when Jonah joined her. He stood beside her for a long moment before crouching, sleeves rolled and hands bare. Together they turned the soil, neither speaking until the rhythm of it wore the silence thin. They'll come again, he said, his voice low. I know. This time they won't walk away so easy. She stabbed the spade into the ground, leaned on it. Then we won't let M. He looked at her, really looked, and there was something new in it. Not surprise, not awe, but recognition. The way a man might see his own reflection in river water after a long drought. Later she found him fashioning traps near the edge of the woods. Not for men, not yet snares for rabbits, maybe foxes. But his hands worked like they remembered how to set a line for worse things. She didn't interrupt. Just watched, remembering how Thomas used to hum when he worked, and how the quiet Jonah carried now was a different kind altogether, not empty but watchful, wary. One evening near dusk, Clara lit the lamp and laid out supper on the table, stew thick with barley, a heel of bread, and the last of the smoked venison. Jonah hesitated before sitting. He never assumed a place in her home, still waited to be invited with each small act. Over the rim of her cup, she said, "If they come back, they won't stop at asking. They'll burn the place down, same as you did to him." He met her gaze. "Then I'll leave, take them with me." "No," she said, firm. "That ain't how it works. You set your roots here same as I did, and if we run every time the past comes callin', we'll never belong anywhere." He was quiet a long while, then said, "You really think we stand a chance?" Clara folded her arms. "I think there's more to fight for now than there was before you came walking out of that tree line." That night a storm blew in from the west. Not snow, rain, sharp and heavy, the kind that cut straight through your coat and settled in the bones. It pounded the roof like warning drums. Clara didn't sleep. She sat by the window, lantern turned low, shotgun across her lap. At one point, Jonah crossed the room and sat opposite her. "I could go by another name," he said quietly. "Move to some hollow in Idaho, be someone else again." She looked at him, rain glinting on the pane behind his head like threads of silver. "Or you could stay, be the man who splits wood before I'm out of bed, who mends fences and stands beside me when the dogs start howling. Be Jonah, whoever he is." He didn't smile, but she saw the flicker of it behind his eyes. By morning the trail was thick with mud and washed-out debris, but the traps he'd set near the woods had been sprung. One held a hare, the other, emptied, torn through, its twine scattered, told a different story. Jonah crouched beside it, studying the ground. Clara stood behind him, arms folded. "Boot tracks," he muttered. "Two pair, one heavy, one light." She nodded. They were close enough to watch the house. He rose slowly, shoulders stiff. "They'll come soon." Clara turned back toward the cabin. "Then we best be ready." Over the next days they prepared, reinforced the door, checked and rechecked the rifles, laid lines of oil along the trail to slow riders. She found the old hunting knife Thomas had left behind and gave it to Jonah without a word. He took it like a relic, not a tool. There was no discussion of what would happen if the fight went bad. No carving of promises or prayers, just motion, hands working in tandem, breath shared across firelight, and something else, something small and warm and persistent, taking root in the space between them. Each evening, Jonah sat a little closer to her chair. Each morning, she found herself glancing out toward the barn with something like hope when he wasn't inside. And one night, when thunder rolled low across the hills and the windows shook in their frames, Clara reached across the table and laid her hand over his. He didn't speak, just turned his palm to catch hers, fingers brushing callus to callus. Outside, the dark gathered close, thick with menace. But inside, in the hush between two hearts, something held, something stayed. It was just before dawn when they came. Clara had risen early, as she always did. The sky was still a deep blue-gray, light only just thinking of returning. She stood at the stove, hands around a mug, when she heard the distant snap of a branch. Not an animal, not wind, something else. Intentional. Jonah was already at the window, rifle in hand. He looked at her once, then moved to the door. No words passed between them. They said everything they needed in the days before. By the time the riders appeared at the edge of the field, the cabin was quiet and ready. 3 men again, same lead, same cold smile beneath the brim of his wide black hat. Only now he didn't stop at the fence. He rode in, slow and deliberate, boots trailing through the mud until he was just 10 paces from the door. He called out without dismounting, "Jonah Black, or James Bell, I don't much care what you're calling yourself this week. You got till the count of 10. Jonah stepped out onto the porch, rifle low but ready. Clara stood behind the door, shotgun braced to her shoulder. "You count all you want," Jonah said, voice calm. "You cross that porch, you won't walk back." The man chuckled, cold and thin. "That woman you hiding behind, she worth dying for." Clara answered before Jonah could. "I'm not behind him," she said. "I'm beside him." There was a pause then, the kind that comes before thunder. The first shot came from the trees, one of the others hidden and waiting. Clara felt the bullet tear into the porch post beside her. Wood splintered. Jonah dropped low, returned fire. A scream echoed through the trees. One down. The man on the horse wheeled around, but Clara had already taken aim. Her shot clipped his shoulder. He tumbled off the horse, landing hard. The third man fled, no honor in a fight he couldn't win. When it was over, the clearing smelled of gunpowder and churned mud. The man on the ground groaned, clutching his arm. Jonah approached him slowly, rifle lowered but not forgotten. "You ride back," he said. "Tell them he's dead. Whoever they're looking for, he's gone. There's only a man here now trying to live quiet." The man stared up, pale with pain. "You'll never be free." Jonah looked past him, to the line of trees, the open sky beyond. "Maybe not, but I ain't running anymore." They let him go. Clara stood on the porch, still and silent. Jonah came to her, breathing hard. "You hurt?" she asked. He shook his head. "No." She looked at him a long moment. Then, as if pulled by a tide neither of them could resist, she stepped forward and pressed her forehead to his chest. He wrapped his arms around her like he'd been waiting years to be allowed to hold something that wouldn't vanish by morning. The days after were quiet, but not the kind of quiet Clara had once craved. This was the quiet of birdsong, of shared coffee, of two bodies moving in rhythm through tasks that had once felt heavy alone. Jonah built a new fence post where the bullet had splintered the old one. Clara cleared a new row in the garden, planting early potatoes, her hands steady, her back strong. Sometimes she would catch him watching her from the porch, and instead of looking away, he'd smile. Not big, not proud, just enough. One night, as they sat in the open air with spring blooming around them, Jonah said, "I don't know what kind of life I can offer." She didn't answer right away, just reached for his hand, warm and real in hers. "You offered me something when you knocked on my door," she said. "You asked to stay." He bowed his head, and when he looked at her, there was no apology in his eyes, only gratitude. The world would still be hard, the past wouldn't vanish, but between them something had grown, not from mercy, not from pity, but from choice. Each day they chose to stay. And in that choosing, they found a kind of peace that didn't shout or blaze, but settled deep, like roots in thawed earth, stubborn, quiet, and strong enough to hold.